Today we are in talks with Derek, who is leading Soarce, a materials technology company. The company extracts biopolymers from seaweed and functionalizes them to create performance materials with properties like UV protection, non-fading brightness, fire resistance, so on and so forth. So they are focused on sustainability, hence the seaweed, and they offer advantages to the traditional material that are being used there. Essentially, in Derek's word, it's the chemistry that sells his product rather than the end product. I think in one of his meetings with prospects and clients in a conference, it's the client who highlighted for him that, I mean, your products are good, they have good properties, they are performance materials, but it's the chemistry which uses the extraction of materials from seaweed and making it usable in production for performance materials in the textile industry that actually is the USP or the MVP. And I think they're working on it. The company, or rather, I would say Derek and his mates, started working on drones when they were still in university. And from there on, Derek talks about the interesting journey and points that led him to start Source. It's going to be an interesting conversation. So let's talk more about it with Derek. So, Derek, very nice to meet you. Thank you for taking time and then talking to us. I guess I was going through the website, I was going through news and announcements that some of your funders have also posted on their website. And one of the first things that I noticed was that prior to Source, you guys were actually working on something related to drones.
Yeah.
Would that do help me understand how did that transition come up, and in general, I mean, the team is intact, so you were working with the same folks, same colleagues that you're working with right now. So how did this transition from drones to materials technology, I mean, happen?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of a long story, but to be kind of a boil it down, we all met in our early days in college at the University of Central Florida, and we quickly realized that we did a bunch of engineering competitions together. At the time, my co-founder Mason and I were aerospace engineers at the University of Central Florida. We did a bunch of engineering competitions, and one day kind of just stumbled upon, hey, like, you want to walking past the UCF Blackstone Launchpad, they had a competition for building a business. So we decided to say, hey, we're good at engineering stuff. Let's maybe take a crack at trying to start a business. And that was actually our first dip into the world of entrepreneurship, company, and what it is to build a startup. So that was actually our very first startup. And what we were doing is we were taking advanced carbon fibers. So these are fibers made of polyacrylonitrile. They're stretched, heated, and they're turned into what we know as like carbon fiber, which you see on some of those high-end sports cars and things like that. And we were basically at the time saying like, hey, there's this whole growing community of drone racers because we were in college, and this is like people that are wearing Ready Player One goggles or flying first person view into these like high speed racing drones. So we said, hey, let's build a business where we manufacture the carbon fiber and the chassis, and then we sell those to a variety of drone racing companies, racing pilots. And that was kind of our initial first business that got our feet wet with what is it like to work with a distributor? What is it like to manufacture? We did all of this out of our garage. And the way that it kind of led into advanced materials from seaweed is we quickly realized over the years, I mean, we spent about 3.5 years in that market. And we just realized there's a kind of a glass ceiling. I mean, we were making hobbyist toys for drone enthusiasts at the end of the day. And we wanted to be a lot more impactful with the company that we were building. So we kind of went back to the drawing board. And at the same time, we were kind of advancing on our degree program at the university, ended up switching into material engineering or material science. And that's actually where we fell in love with, okay, instead of trying to combine fibers and glue, it's essentially what a composite carbon fiber is, we decided to kind of go down even a layer deeper and say, can we manufacture the fiber ourselves? And that's kind of what led us down the rabbit hole of looking into biocomposites and biomaterials, where we started to utilize these biomaterials to actually spin our own individual fibers. And that's kind of where we got our first, I'd say, push or shift into this direction of using biomaterials for textile and fabric applications.
And that's an interesting story. I mean, because when I read drones and advanced biomaterials, there is no connection,
Yeah.
but there is actually a connection. Yeah, right. And that's the material research part that you were doing there, actually translated into a motivation for going into the textile market. And of course, being in the industry, you also get to know the growth aspect, and that's
Oh, yeah.
also one of the things that
Yeah, I mean,
understood.
one of the biggest areas for us is we realized that composites itself wasn't like for us being young graduate engineers, we weren't going to be able to compete with the DoD contractors like Northrop and Lockheed Martin. So there was
Yeah.
a glass ceiling we couldn't break through.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I think it's also tough to go this route where you're actually directly entering into the world of entrepreneurship as compared to maybe gaining some experience at a materials company, gaining some experience
Mhm.
at textile company or a nanotech company for that matter, and then taking a deep dive. Because then you have the industry experience and you're ready in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think most of the entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs that I have made, I don't think they have gone this route. They have always chosen that, hey, I mean, I have an idea, let's test it out and then figure things out. That's the way that people go. I don't know if one is better than the other, but seems to be working for most people that,
It
I mean,
it really just, I think, depends on the person. I think one thing that's worked out and the most benefit for us is that we're not afraid to take risk, and we're not afraid to kind of go and fall flat on our face. I kind of think one of our motto is, as long as we're falling forward, then we're learning something and we're developing. If you're not breaking stuff, you're not innovating. So in that regard, I think we've been able to kind of just take a lucky, I don't say lucky, but an educated guess and moving forward, and just learning as we go. I think that's honestly the best way. There's no rule book on how to build a business. As much as people will tell you there
absolutely.
is, you kind of just do it and figure it out as you go, and you see what works and what doesn't
Yeah.
as you trial and experiment.
Absolutely. And that's why I have also seen that people who start early, they also figure out what they need to learn very, very
Yes.
early. And that's one of the things that actually takes them way ahead than somebody who is actually sitting on ideas, thinking, hey, whether I should be going into this or not. But let's come back to Source. So Source, you have a product, you have a technology, proprietary chemistry,
Yep.
and it's a good play of words also,
Yeah.
ceramics and seaweed.
Yeah.
So I like that part. But in general, if you are pitching to a potential customer,
Mhm.
what is it that you highlight to them about Source, about ceramics, about in general your technology?
Yeah. So one of the big things that we highlight is that we're a performance material first. So essentially, what we do is we extract specific key biopolymers and biocomponents out of seaweed. Sometimes this is invasive seaweeds like sargassum. Sometimes it's your like large growing, quickly growing seaweeds such as like Laminoria hypobora or your brown algae. And essentially, what we're doing is we're taking these biopolymers, extracting them out. We're functionalizing them with our own unique non-toxic chemistries, and these functionalizations give them performance properties. So we're being able to increase UV protection, fire protection, reduce water consumption during the dye process for textile dyeing companies. So those are the things that we lead with, is that we're a performance first company. It just so happens to be that a lot of the materials that we're using, they're green chemicals, so we're utilizing green chemistry, as well as they're all bio-based materials, so we're able to increase the bio content for a lot of the companies that we work with. But some of the biggest things that we're working on right now is utilizing our biopolymer as a paint binder. So this is a replacement to your traditional acrylics, your acrylic binders, and we're seeing a lot of advancement in there, where we're seeing a lot of people utilize our ceramic material, which is a combination of seaweed plus inorganic ceramics that give it some performance properties. And they're utilizing it for optical brighteners, viscosity modifiers, as well as just as a binding agent for natural pigmentation. And then on the more performance side, we're actually working with a variety of companies on increasing their fire performance. So one of the big issues right now, especially in the EU, they're straying away from using halogenated or brominated or phosphorated compounds, just because we're starting
Yeah.
to realize the toxicity that they're causing. And a lot of times, a lot of these toxic chemicals are coming in contact with the skin because you're either wearing it on textile, you're sitting on it on a couch in an industrial setting. So the thing that's really interested about us is they're able to get these performance properties like UV shielding, fire protection, and all that, while still utilizing a bio-based product. And given that the big shift is happening in the EU, where they're all trying to kind of move away from these toxic chemicals, as well as chemicals that are found on the ZDHC list, it's quite a big thing on the top of their mind right now.
Yeah, that makes sense because I also remember the GDPR regulations that Europe actually promoted, and that actually resulted in billion-dollar companies being created in the United
Yeah.
States, right? So regulation is a big push towards sustainability, and I think it's also a good growth factor for new startups to come up because now you're not competing on cost.
Yeah.
You have, yeah, so that's one of the things. But talking about costs, Derek, I mean, are you competitive in terms of the traditional binders or the traditional additive technology that is there? Because I mean, if I imagine consumers, which will be largely businesses who are producing textiles or performance
Mhm.
apparels, any business will first protect their bottom
Oh yeah.
line and then talk about something
A
else,
hundred,
right?
a
And
hundred,
that's something that, yeah,
100%.
go
At the
ahead.
end of the day, business is like, to your point, it's going to come down to the bottom line, and how much is it going to drive the cost up, and if that is that value generated going to be worth the cost that it's going to be incurred by the business. A lot of times, what we're seeing, we're actually coming in at cost, or if not lower, dependent on certain things. So we're able to save on specific applications in the manufacturing process. So just as like I'd say a unit by unit price or a kilogram per kilogram cost, we are going to be more expensive than your traditional type of binders and materials. Given that we do have a kind of a green premium, as well as just we're a younger company, we don't have the luxuries of the economies of scale yet. But on that note, we are saving companies money in other areas. So we're actually saving them on energy use, on water treatment costs down the line. So a lot of the times with the companies that we work with, we actually kind of work through something that we call value-based pricing or value-based costs, where yes, we're a little bit more expensive up front, but on the downstream, again, you're saving on labor, you're saving on water consumption, you're saving on specific energy needs. So in the long run, when you look at it a full holistic picture, we're actually saving some of these companies quite a bit of money on the back end.
Understood. Understood. And that makes complete sense. And again, I mean, this is just out of curiosity. I wanted to ask you because there are two components associated to it. One, you have a superior product. I mean, titanium oxide is being removed from the process because the brightening agents that you guys are producing is much more environmentally friendly. So that's one aspect. But also, I mean, the claims that you make that it will not yellow. I mean, the leathers that you alternative leathers, the colors will keep on brightened. And of course, I mean, then there are the fire protection, the UV protection on
Yeah.
the other side of things. So it's a mark of a superior product. That's one value. And then there is the sustainability part. That's another value. So which in general generates more traction in the minds of customer? I mean, is it the first part, which is the innovation on the material side,
Yeah.
or is it the sustainability?
I would definitely say the thing that attracts the businesses is the performance. So, for instance, on all the companies that we talk to, their performance first. So, the fact that we have a non-yellowing white that's not using TiO2 or zinc oxide is really, really big for them because they've seen issues where they've lost hundred thousands of dollars worth of product because they shipped it from one location to another location and it started to yellow
Wow.
due to thermal oxidation or due to just UV oxidation. So a lot, I'd say the businesses get quite excited about the actual performance gain. Now, being a business and being on that they have to market these products, one of the biggest things that they're seeing is, of course, the narrative story that they can tell. So I think that a lot of the companies that we work with love the sourced from the sea narrative, where you're taking something from the ocean, you're valorizing some waste biomass, and then you're turning that into a value added product. So it allows them to
Yeah.
explain to their customers a narrative of saying, hey, we are using sustainable materials or we are trying to use more bio-based products. And they're actually performing quite well, if not outperforming the current incumbents that we traditionally use today.
Understood. And I think, I mean, if I were to summarize this, your product comes with the pitch also. So the pitch is the sustainability part, and the product, of course, I mean,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
performing.
The pitch is
Yeah.
definitely the sustainability part for the consumer and the narrative. But I think a lot of the times the business, like to your point, is they're worried about the bottom line and saying, okay, can we generate more value with
Yeah.
this new product line?
Yeah, that makes sense. Talking about one of your recent investments that you guys gathered, it was from Founder Factory, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And when I was reading through the help or the assistance that those guys will provide, one of the things that they mentioned was supply chain deals with sourcing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So has sourcing become a challenge as you guys are growing? Do you anticipate it is going to become a challenge?
I would say yes. At the end of the day, for any materials company or any of these companies that are building some sort of like building their company off of a feedstock, supply chain is going to be the number one thing you have to think about day in and day out. For us, luckily, we have very strong supply chain partners. We have about three, one or two are located in the UK, and then one is located here in the Caribbean. And we're lucky that there's quite a lot of seaweed. Actually, there's a lot of companies and organizations trying to figure out how to get rid of majority of the seaweed. So we don't foresee a full-on supply chain crunch being a big issue, but it's something we definitely keep aware of because depending on where you acquire your seaweed, whether it be a different species such as sargassum versus brown algae or like laminaria, you'll get a different product. So one thing that we do on our end is we make sure we have really stringent quality control, ensuring that the product that we export or the product that we produce is consistent across the board, no matter what feedstock of seaweed that we utilize. So for us, it's just making sure we have proper abundance and we can extract the amount of the biopolymer that we specifically want at the required, let's say, level. So like I said, some seaweeds have maybe 10%, some maybe only have 5%. So it's just making sure you're being calculated and making sure you have an efficient supply chain of stuff always coming in the door compared to what you're shipping out.
That makes sense. So there are two aspects to the products or to in general the technology that you guys have. One of course is the seaweed side of things or the sourcing side of things. and the other part is the chemistry and the nanotechnology.
Yep.
So how do these two integrate? I mean, where does nanotechnology come in? I mean, is it a conventional use of nanotechnology which happens in most of the additives, or is it something different?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, what we're doing is we're actually taking, we're taking those biopolymers from the seaweed, we're functionalizing it. So that's where the unique chemistry is coming in, where we're kind of using our own in-house developed non-toxic solvents that we kind of developed in-house to do our functionalization, and that basically acts as a pre-treatment for us to go through what we call our nano processing techniques, where we take it, it's at the core of it, it's this like a high scale blending, what you would see at your home blender, but just kind of, I'd say, scaled up quite a bit, quite a factors of magnitude there. But essentially, what's happening there is we're actually reducing the particle size and we're turning it into a true nanomaterial. Where if you look on it under an SEM or any high-powered microscopes, you would see materials anywhere within the nanometer range. You're seeing micron in length, but nanometer in dimension. As well as we can add different types of inorganic particles. So, of course, in the ceramic, what we're looking to do there, we're adding basically micron-sized particles, and then we take it through a series of steps of particle reduction to turn it into true nanoscale kind of suspended particles. Where once you get to these levels, you actually get a variety of different performance characteristics. So that's where you kind of start seeing the fire resistance increase, the UV properties increase. Because as a micron level particle, it's like putting a boulder on top of a piece of textile. Whereas when you start to do the particle reduction and you get these high quality nanomaterials, they're actually able to cover the surface area much more efficiently, and you get I'd
Of
say a
course,
lot more bang for your buck, essentially, because a little goes a long way when you have such small materials.
that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, when so we have discussed the fire resistant part multiple times during our conversation. And whenever I think of fire resistant, either I think of the fire department or I think of stuntmen in the Hollywood. I mean, they do require
Oh
such
yeah.
kind of apparels. Has there been any instance where some of those folks used the apparels made out of your technology? I mean, do you have such
So
record?
we don't have any particular one in like the fire department area just yet because there's quite a bit of certification you need to get into those markets, which of course for us is kind of on the roadmap as we develop. But one of the biggest areas that when we first started, we actually got we joined the National Science Foundation I-Corps program when we were part of the University of Central Florida. And essentially what that tasked us to do was basically do a deep dive on who needs fire retardant and fire retardant materials. And of course, one of the biggest areas that is of most interest right now is in the firefighting department. So, what they call turnout gear, which is what firefighters wear when they're going, of course, to respond to a specific
Yes.
fire or scene. One of the biggest things that they're seeing there is, again, those materials are sprayed with some pretty nasty chemicals. And most people don't
Yeah.
realize, but when a firefighter is, of course, going to fight a fire, they sweat quite a lot. So their skin on their pores opens up. And when that happens, a lot of these toxic chemicals actually leach into the skin. So one of the biggest areas that when we first started this, we were looking at fire departments. We were understanding how do fire departments purchase their gear. What are some of the largest companies in that space that are working and making turnout gear? And for us, it is on a kind of the roadmap on being able to tap into those more advanced, let's say, fire department markets. But it's just kind of a game of scaling, timing, and getting the proper certification. But we
Yeah.
do really want to work with like first responders because that's a very large area that is of big interest, I would say, just due to a lot of the regulations switching and a lot of the data that's coming out about some of the toxicities and what it's doing to the actual first responders, where they're receiving pretty nasty cancers and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think, I mean, as you were talking, I was imagining parallel or adjacent application areas. Anybody basically who is working in a hazardous
Definitely.
environment usually would require that. And that includes folks in oil and gas, that includes the firefighting department, that includes somebody who is actually working with the disaster management team, so on and so forth. So I
Yep.
think there are a lot of areas, and these application areas don't get a lot of attention because I mean there are big players who have dominated
Hmm.
in general the market. So I mean it's the same suit that I
Hmm.
see in Europe as well as in US.
Yep.
So maybe I mean that needs disruption.
Yeah,
It's high time that
I think the key point you just mentioned there is that there's not a lot of people looking at that space. So
yes,
when not a lot of people look at that space, there's not a lot of innovation in that space. So we've been stagnant in that market in that area for quite a long time. And I think it's only now that companies are kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, how can we solve this problem? And luckily enough, we're
yeah,
seeing that we can potentially be a solution to that.
that makes sense. And then let me come back to your journey so far. So have there been any points where you thought that hey, I mean we have tried this out, this is not working,
Oh,
maybe it's time to move on? I mean,
100.
have there been such instances?
Oh, plenty of times. I mean, from our first business when we pivoted from drones to when we weren't a composite company. But I think with this general business, companies and people may remember us for when we first joined the Legacy of Adidas Accelerator program. We were first building an actual fiber. So we were using our chemistry to actually develop a single filament fiber. We quickly realized that the amount of scale that you need to be at and the minimum order quantities necessary to work with a textile mill just to get a prototype would be in the hundreds of yards to hundreds of thousands of
Wow.
yards, which was just way too large for a startup company to be able to test out their product. So then we pivoted into being more of utilizing our chemistry as the leather itself. So we were actually developing our own bio-based leather, competitive to a lot of the companies such as like Natural Fiber Welding, NFW, Polybion, Microworks. These are companies that are all making sustainable based leathers that are not based on cowhide. So we played in that space for a little bit of time. But then again, we ran into a kind of a roadblock where we realized, well, we're not a leather company. At the core of what we do, we're a materials innovation company that's built a unique chemistry. And it wasn't until we were actually at a large scale fashion event in January of this past year called Biofabricate, where we basically had two products. We had our leather based product, and then we had our chemistries sitting right next to it. And the most interesting thing that happened there is we had a lot of companies come up to us and say, "That's a cool leather, but these chemistries that you guys have, these solutions that you have from seaweed, we have really demanding problems in the fire resistance and the UV protection and all these other areas that we would love to use your chemistry." So then we started to just kind of sink into what we really know best and kind of pivot, I would say, directly into what we do now is where we're strictly a chemical company. We're an additives company where we develop materials from seaweed, we functionalize them, enhance them, and then distribute those to a variety of clients in the fashion and textile space. So I think there's been a series of pivots that have kind of gotten us to our core competency, which is what we do today. And it just, again, it takes time and you figure that out. Like I said, there's no rule book on how to build it. You kind of just, as you're working with your clients and the customers that you work with, they kind of steer you in the direction of like, hey, we have this really big problem and you have a solution that can solve that problem.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a very interesting point because, I mean, sometimes the chemistry part, I mean, of course, you guys were the originators, the innovators for the chemistry part.
Mm-hmm.
But I think having that being realized into a product form, which is the leather
Mm-hmm.
that you guys were trying to demonstrate there, sometimes the customers tell you the pain point that, hey, I mean, this is more important or this is much more valuable as
100%.
compared to this one. And so, which brings me to my next question because essentially what I hear is that you are a chemical company, but you are really a technology company
Mm-hmm.
in the chemical space.
Yep.
It's your technology which is valuable. It's the technology which has demand. It's the byproducts of that technology which is resulting in multiple
Yes,
applications,
sir.
multiple properties, right? Which in turn means that you need to be very, very careful and protective about that
Of
technology
course.
because that's the core part of it,
Right.
right? So what is your opinion in general? Because I think about IP, about protection of the technology that you guys have. Are you very active in protecting your IP? What's your viewpoint as to how important IP is
Yeah, I mean,
in terms
I
of?
think being any deep tech company, IP is definitely a critical piece of development, and you need to have a very strong IP strategy and roadmap as you develop. For us right now, we have a series of patents that we filed on the actual composition of the chemistry, as well as the methods of manufacturing the chemistry. It's at the end of the day, we look at it as kind of a layered approach. So let's say in the center, like an onion, you'd have your core, which is the actual, let's say, composition of the chemistry. Then a one layer out would be the actual manufacturing and how you process it, and then another layer out from that would be the actual applications that those materials would then go into. So you can build out your patent moat, like I say, like a very layered approach. That's the way that we look at it. But at the end of the day, patents are just kind of words on a piece of paper. At the end of the day, you got to be able to
Yeah,
build the business and scale it and commercialize the material. I really think when it comes to that, a good offense is a better defense. Just working well with your clients, scaling the business, getting it to a cost competitive rate. And if you're able to do that, I think the brand and your customer service will take you much further than just being able to find out what some laboratory in some other area did they kind of copy our widget? Can we see on the chemical analysis that they copied us? Do we want to go through litigation with that company? I think there's a lot of course you want to be protected, but I think again at the end of the day, just having good business practice and moving quickly allows you to go much further with patents.
yeah, yeah. I think that makes sense. I think that's a good perspective to have. I was talking to somebody who was producing silica from ash, the power plant ashes that's
Mm-hmm.
being generated, and they were using it in tire industry for fillers. And they also filed US patents. And I asked them about the same question. And one of the things that they said is it's not just about the defensive strategy or protecting your innovation, but one of the things that they mentioned is it also provides credibility to your
Yeah.
innovation. Because, and also, I mean, if somebody is buying from you, they don't want to get entangled in a
Yeah.
litigation at a later point of time because it was not protected. So that is also one of the things that I got to learn, that I mean, people have that perspective also. It's not just about innovating. And you're right. I mean, somebody simply trying to maybe design around your technology, they may not essentially become successful unless they have the same market
Yeah.
factors and the entrepreneurship cycle that they follow like you. But there are also bigger companies who see potential as you become much more noticeable,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's technology and chemistry.
Mhm.
And then there are companies who have shitload of money
Yeah.
who can actually do this in-house and still be able to get away with it. I think that's kind of the conundrum here, but I don't know if there is an answer to that. Maybe I mean collaboration or
Yeah,
acquisition is an answer to
the way
that.
that we approach that is again, be faster, be more lean than they are. Hopefully, the patents protect against what they are trying to. Of course, I mean they have a lot of money; they can just throw money at the problem.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean
Yes.
that they're going to have the individuals within the company that want to push it and want to commercialize it as hard as they can. Because we've realized being an entrepreneur within a company. For instance, we had a really good advisor who worked for DuPont for many years. And then DuPont, of course, one of the large chemical companies, very well known. He tried to be an
Yes.
entrepreneur within DuPont and help actually commercialize the black inks from what we know today in the HP printers. But he
Wow.
found a lot of trouble in trying to be an entrepreneur within a company. So sometimes companies are just kind of they get good at what they get good at and they stick in that lane. Now there are of
That
course
makes
there
sense.
are outcore organizations just like you said they have a boatload of money they can throw a boatload of money at the problem. For us, the way we look at it is hopefully our IP strategy keeps us protected from them. And at the end of the day, we want to be an acquisition target for them. I mean, we don't want to work necessarily. We want to take market share from them at the end of the day, and then in hopes of saying like, hey, to get that market share back, you got to pay us a price tag of acquiring the company. And then they can bring that IP in
And
house and develop it however they feel fit.
that's a very sound logic, and I think it's also a very good future plan. Talking about future plans, Derek, I mean, so essentially it happens, and that's what my general observation is with talking to startup founders is that they have a core product or prototype one, which they develop,
Mhm.
find customers, and during the process of the consumption of this solution, there are other problem statements that come into picture, which you then solve,
Yep.
make your product better, and then move on from there. So, what's the next problem that you're solving in your product, in your
Yeah,
technology?
for us, it's definitely moving into the pilot scale facility. So we've been able to prove out our technology from a lab scale perspective, and let's say the couple kilogram of production. We have worked with a variety of our clients. Our clients like the product that we've developed. Now, for us, is being able to go raise some capital to go build our pilot facility to then operate this in our pilot facility to be go from a couple kilograms to around 100 kilograms a month. And that's where we really want to be of our material, where we're saying, okay, we're getting reproducible every single month. We're same quality control, same amount of materials coming out of the door, and we're able to service the clients that we currently work with, and they're enjoying the product. For us, we want to get to that flywheel kind of cycle and iron out all the kinks of our pilot production facility from kind of just tweaking all the bells and whistles for optimization from energy consumption to just speed of production and what we need on the line and things like that. We want to really basically I'd say get some battle scars in that pilot facility to then move into a full scale commercial facility where we'd be doing
Yeah,
about tonnage per month.
that makes sense. I think, I mean, it's the logical next step
Yeah,
to actually
yeah.
scale up.
Yeah, we don't
Yeah, that
really
makes
have any
sense.
too large technology roadmaps anymore. It's more of scalability roadmaps as well as just integration into companies and how you would go about that
So,
integration.
so how do you manage your hiring? Because I mean, as a startup founder, as somebody, I mean, who is at the core of founding this technology, and a group of trusted
Yeah,
confidants who actually have helped you till this point of time. I mean, anybody you hire is not going to be so
yeah.
passionate, so energetic about actually doing the same work that you guys are doing. So, what kind of challenges have you seen in hiring? And plus, hiring is not something that you come with, which comes as a skill automatically, like entrepreneurship. I mean, you have a passion, you have a product, and you need to learn to actually make that product popular. But What about
So
hiring?
I'd say for hiring, we've been relatively lucky. I think we've been very selective on who we've hired. We've just kind of heard a lot of the horror stories from previous entrepreneurs because I'd say one of the strongest things about being an entrepreneur that can help out is just having a good entrepreneurial network. So basically, having
Mhm.
individuals that have been there, done that, whether they be in your market or not in your market, they can still give you really sound advice. And I think one of the biggest things that we learned from a lot of the advisors and people we spoke to in the Orlando community is make sure you know who you're hiring. We go through a pretty strict vetting process of we're saying, okay, do we like to work with this person? Do we feel that this person is open minded and can learn? Because at the end of the day, there's not many companies that work on what we work on. So like we expect someone to come into the job fully open minded and being willing to learn. And again, if you're in a startup, you're going to wear multiple hats. One week you're going to be doing on the line chemistry work. The next week you're going to be talking to a customer. The next week maybe you're designing and building something for the line. Like it really is, we look for people that are adaptable and can wear multiple hats. And truthfully, just people you can work with, people you feel comfortable working around and comfortable working with. Because again, in a startup, things are crazy. You have a lot of ups and downs. There's good days, bad days, and
Yeah.
everyone needs to be able to understand that and row in the same direction. Like we all have a common goal, which is of course commercializing the company and developing the products further. And I think everyone really has a generally pretty good understanding of that. But it's just making sure coming in day out that you have that knowledge of where you're trying to go and everyone's working toward that common goal.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I think sticking to a common vision or mission till the next stage is as what actually takes you forward. Talking about bad days, I mean, again, I mean, just out of curiosity, has there been days where your core team doesn't agree with you and there are frustrations, I mean, on the way to
Oh
take
yeah,
care? How do you resolve those? Because, I mean, you are university mates also,
yeah,
right?
no, I mean, there's I mean, every other day there's disagreements. At the end of the day, being in a startup or running a business, you have to make the best educated decisions you can with the most amount of data that you
Yeah.
can at that moment. So a lot of the times we like to put ego to the side. So I'd say the number one thing for us is put ego to the side and let data be the main driving force for decision making. So we try to make the best educated decisions we can with the data that we have at the moment. So there's been times, of course, we disagree on what we need to do, but then again, when we do, we kind of, I'd say, break apart for a few minutes, come back together and say, okay, with all the information we currently have, with all the things that we currently know, what is the best data driven decision we can make at this moment? And then you make that decision and you live with it, you test it, and you see, okay, did it work or not work? And you just need to have a strong feedback loop of that test. Like, okay, did it work? It didn't work. Okay, go back and test again. It did work. Okay, maybe we should explore more. And just having that feedback loop and being able to iterate through that feedback loop quickly is what I truly feel establishes good decision making as well as just leaves no argumentative ability on the table.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you mentioned you being a young entrepreneur. You look the young entrepreneur part, but you sound the experienced entrepreneur part. So I think, I mean,
Thanks.
the decision making process so far, what I have heard is streamlined. I think, I mean, you have a very, very good team. I mean, if you can disagree and still come back and stick to that same common goal or vision, I think, I mean, that's the team to have. But overall, I really enjoyed talking to you, Derek. I think those were the questions on my mind that I wanted to ask you and understand a bit deeper about the technology, so on and so forth.
Perfect.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
and
taking the time. Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you, Vikas, and let me know if you ever need any more information or and look forward to what interview turns into.